Mom kicked me out at 16 for her new family, now demands my $100,000 savings to send her real kids to college after she found out I'm a wealthy executive. She got arrested instead. My name is Victor. I am 33 years old, and I currently work as a senior executive at a major firm. If my career has taught me anything, it is that life is essentially a series of investments. We invest our time, our energy, and our emotions into people, hoping for some kind of return: love, loyalty, or just basic human decency. But sometimes, you have to look at a relationship, realize it is completely bankrupt, and cut your losses. I learned this concept of emotional bankruptcy not in a boardroom, but in my own childhood living room. To understand how things got so ugly recently, you need to understand the baseline of my life. My mother, Brenda, gave birth to me when she was only 20 years old. My biological father was nothing more than a ghost. From what I was told, they had only been dating for a few months when she got pregnant. He made it crystal clear he never wanted children, so she gave him the easiest out possible. He walked away. She did not bother filing for child support, and that was the end of that chapter. A clean break. A terrible investment from the start. Because she was so young, we heavily relied on my grandparents, Helen and George. They were the actual safety net of my existence. They provided the roof over our heads and the unwavering encouragement Brenda needed to finish her schooling and secure a decent job. During those early years, it was just the two of us living under my grandparents' protective shadow. It was not a fairy tale, but it was survivable. Even as a young kid, maybe 6 or 7, I possessed a hyper-awareness of my mother's emotional state. Children of single, stressed parents often develop this sort of radar. I knew exactly when to be quiet, when to disappear into my room, and when to ask for absolutely nothing. I actively molded myself into a low-maintenance child because I intuitively understood that I was a burden. I was the living, breathing reminder of a mistake she made at 20. She never hit me, she rarely yelled, but there was a persistent, subtle coldness. A transactional nature to her affection. She did what was legally and morally required to keep me alive, but the warmth you expect from a mother just was not there. It felt like I was an obligation on a spreadsheet she had to deal with every single day. Still, she was my mother, and I was just a kid desperate for her to look at me with genuine pride. I held on to the naive hope that if I was just good enough, quiet enough, and smart enough, my value in her eyes would eventually go up. Then came what I now refer to as the acquisition. That is how I think of Gregory. I was around 8 years old when Brenda started dating him. He was a coworker of hers, another web engineer. They dated for 3 years before getting married when I was 11. When Gregory moved in, the entire dynamic of the household shifted. He was not an overtly cruel man. He did not play the role of the wicked stepfather who threw punches or screamed. His cruelty was much more calculated and mathematical. Gregory looked at our family unit the exact same way he probably looked at a line of computer code, looking for inefficiencies. And in his eyes, I was a massive inefficiency. A drain on resources. We would sit at the dinner table, and I could feel his eyes tracking how much food I put on my plate. When back-to-school season rolled around, the purchase of a simple pair of sneakers or a few notebooks was treated like a major corporate audit. He would sigh, pull out receipts, and make sure I knew exactly how many dollars and cents were being spent on my existence. Brenda, eager to please her new husband and secure her new life, naturally aligned with him. I went from being a manageable burden to a glaring liability on their joint balance sheet. Things stabilized in this uncomfortable, passive-aggressive state for a few years. But the real market crash of my childhood happened 4 years after they got married. Brenda got pregnant. Not just with one baby, but with twins. Lucas and Maya. I was 15 and a half when the twins were born. Initially, like an idiot, I was actually overjoyed. I thought having siblings would bring us closer together. I thought the shared experience of a larger family might finally thaw the ice. In retrospect, I should have read the room better. The moment those 2 babies came home, the environment in the house became suffocating. The smell of baby powder completely masked the growing tension. Every ounce of Brenda and Gregory's emotional and financial capital was immediately diverted to the twins. I tried to be helpful. I tried to stay out of the way. But every time I entered a room, Brenda looked at me with this profound, exhausting irritation. I was breathing their air. I was taking up space that could be used for her new, perfect family. I made myself as scarce as humanly possible, spending hours at the library or walking around the neighborhood until it was dark. But it was not enough. You cannot hide from people who have already decided they want you gone. The devaluation of my worth was complete. I was just waiting for the final layoff notice. The actual liquidation of my place in the family happened 6 months after the twins were born. I had just turned 16. It was a Tuesday evening, quiet, with the twins asleep in the other room. Brenda and Gregory sat me down at the kitchen table. The atmosphere was completely sterile. No anger, no tears. Just a business meeting. They started by highlighting the massive financial burden of providing for a big family. They talked about their meager income as 2 web engineers, which was a complete fabrication, as we had been living a very comfortable middle-class lifestyle up until that point. They spun a web of economic hardship, claiming they simply could not keep me in the house anymore. I sat there, a 16-year-old kid, feeling the ground rip open beneath my feet. I genuinely did not want to leave. This was my home. I panicked and started offering solutions. I told them I would get a part-time job. I said I would pay for my own food, my own clothes, anything to just stay in my room. I tried to negotiate my own survival. That was when Brenda delivered the killing blow. She looked me dead in the eyes, devoid of any maternal instinct, and said she did not want my money. She said she wanted to save all the household resources for the children who actually deserved it. I will never forget that word. Deserved. She did not say they needed it more. She said they deserved it more than I did. In that fraction of a second, something inside my brain snapped. It was a permanent, irreversible shift. The illusion of a mother-son bond shattered into a million unfixable pieces. They knew they could not legally evict a minor without getting authorities involved, so they had carefully engineered this psychological pressure cooker to force me to walk out on my own. They knew I had just enough pride left to not stay where I was so explicitly despised. I did not cry. I did not yell. The time for emotional reactions was over. I stood up from the table, walked to my bedroom, and grabbed 2 duffel bags. I packed my clothes, my school books, and nothing else. I did not say a single word to either of them as I walked out the front door. I walked the 3 miles to my grandparents' house in the dark. That walk was the defining journey of my life. With every step, I accepted the reality. Nobody was coming to save me, nobody wanted me, and my mother had just officially declared emotional bankruptcy on our relationship. Helen and George took me in without a second of hesitation. They were furious when I told them what happened, absolutely appalled by Brenda's actions. But because they desperately wanted to be in the lives of the newborn twins, they did not completely cut her off. I understood their position. I did not ask them to choose. Living in my grandparents' spare bedroom was a stark contrast to my previous life. It was safe, it was quiet, but the psychological toll of being thrown away by your own mother is not something you just sleep off. I spent the rest of my high school years building a mental fortress. Whenever holidays or family gatherings rolled around, Brenda and Gregory would show up with the twins. The interactions we had were bizarre. She treated me like a distant nephew she was vaguely aware of. There were no questions about my grades, no interest in my life. It was entirely formal. In fact, on the rare occasions she did look at me, she seemed almost relieved, as if she was patting herself on the back for successfully removing a tumor from her life. Instead of letting this destroy me, I used it. I made a conscious, deliberate choice to kill any lingering hope of reconciliation. Hope is a dangerous liability when it is tied to toxic people. I stopped expecting anything from her. I stopped thinking of her as my mother. I categorized her as a biological technicality. This strict mental boundary was my salvation. I realized that if I was going to survive in this world, I had to become entirely self-reliant. No safety nets, no backups. Just me against the math of life. I got a part-time job at a grocery store at 16 because my grandparents, on their fixed retirement income, simply could not afford to fully support a growing teenager. I started hoarding every dollar I made, preparing for a future I knew I had to fund entirely by myself. The real test came when it was time for college. I had the grades, but I absolutely did not have the capital. My grandparents were too old and their health too fragile to take on the financial burden. Brenda and Gregory, predictably, declined to offer a single cent. They explicitly stated they were preserving all their money for the twins' future. I was facing a brick wall until my uncle Richard stepped in. Richard is Brenda's brother. He saw the situation for what it was and offered to be the co-signer for my student loans. It was an incredible act of grace, a massive risk on his part, and I made a blood vow to myself that he would never have to pay a single dime of my debt. College was not an experience of frat parties and finding myself. It was an absolute, grueling proving ground. It was a masterclass in survival. Because I was terrified of defaulting and ruining my uncle's credit, I worked like a machine. I took a full course load while working 3 part-time jobs. I worked the graveyard shift at a local diner, I tutored other students, and I did data entry on weekends. I lived on a diet of stale bread, cheap ramen, and sheer, unadulterated panic. The fear of failure was a physical weight on my chest every single day. If I failed a class, I lost a scholarship. If I lost a scholarship, I could not pay tuition. If I could not pay tuition, I was back on the street with nothing. I remember nights sitting in the library at 2 in the morning, exhausted to the bone, calculating exactly how many hours I needed to work to afford basic utilities for the month. And through all that exhaustion, the image of Brenda comfortably saving her tech salary money for her real kids burned in the back of my mind. It was a dark, bitter fuel, but it kept my engine running. Graduation day was completely quiet. My grandparents were there, smiling and crying. Uncle Richard sent a card. Brenda did not even bother to send a text message. Not a single word of congratulations. She was entirely absent, which was exactly what I expected. I entered the corporate world with a degree and a mountain of debt, but I also had something my peers did not: absolute psychological resilience. When you have survived being discarded by the person who gave you life, dealing with office politics, demanding bosses, and corporate pressure feels like child's play. I started at an entry-level position at my current firm and applied the same behavioral psychology I used to survive my childhood. I learned to read the room, understand what my superiors actually wanted versus what they said they wanted, and made myself indispensable. I treated my career the way I treated my survival, methodically and without emotion. For the first few years, despite making a decent salary, I lived in a tiny studio apartment. I drove a beat-up car. I did not take vacations. Every spare dollar I earned was weaponized against my student debt. I paid off the loans years ahead of schedule, completely freeing Uncle Richard from his co-signer status. Once the debt was gone, I started aggressively investing. I was obsessed with building a financial wall so high that no one could ever make me feel as helpless as I felt at 16. During this entire ascent, I maintained a strict, unbreakable rule of no contact with Brenda and Gregory. I blocked them on every platform imaginable. They were dead to me. A completely closed account. That brings us to the present day. I am now 33 years old. About 4 months ago, my relentless grind finally paid off in a massive way. I was promoted to a senior management role. With it came a significant equity package and a base salary well into the 6 figures. My investment portfolio and liquid savings officially crossed the $100,000 milestone. I was secure. I had won the game they forced me to play. I wanted to keep this promotion relatively quiet. I am not a flashy person. However, out of deep gratitude, I privately shared the news with Uncle Richard. He was the one who took a gamble on me when I was just a desperate kid, and I wanted him to know his investment had yielded incredible returns. But humans are flawed, and Uncle Richard, despite his golden heart, made a critical error. A few weeks ago, there was a large family get-together. I, of course, did not attend. According to what I learned later, Uncle Richard ran into Brenda and Gregory. Having a few drinks and feeling incredibly proud of me, he started bragging. He told them about my new title. He told them I was one of the youngest senior executives in the firm. He strongly hinted at the massive wealth I was now accumulating. He even urged Brenda to reach out and congratulate me. He had no idea about the depth of the poison between us. He assumed time heals all wounds. He did not realize that by leaking my financial status to Brenda and Gregory, he was essentially dropping blood into a shark tank. He unknowingly handed a map of my hidden treasure to the very pirates who threw me overboard. The silence of 18 years was about to be broken, and the storm was heading straight for my front door. Thank you for watching. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling us which city you are watching from. Every single comment helps push this video to a wider audience, and we truly appreciate your support. Stay tuned for the dramatic conclusion. The fallout from Uncle Richard's well-intentioned mistake did not happen immediately. There was a quiet period of about 2 weeks where absolutely nothing occurred. I went to work, I managed my portfolio, I lived my peaceful, highly regulated life. Then came a random Thursday evening. I had just finished cooking a decent dinner, pouring myself a glass of water, and sitting down to review some quarterly reports when the notification chimed on my phone. Motion detected at the front door. I opened the security camera app, expecting a late package delivery. Instead, staring back at me through the high-definition lens, were 2 ghosts from a previous life. Brenda and Gregory. I sat there for a full minute, just staring at the screen. The initial shock was purely physical, a cold spike of adrenaline hitting my stomach. 18 years is a massive stretch of time, but the brain never truly forgets the faces of the people who broke you. However, as the initial shock faded, the analytical side of my brain took over. I zoomed in on the footage. They did not look like the confident, arrogant people who had coolly evicted a 16-year-old kid. They looked absolutely haggard. Gregory's posture was completely defeated, his shoulders slumped, and his clothes looked slightly worn. Brenda looked aged far beyond her 51 years. The stress lines around her mouth and eyes were deeply carved. They looked like people who had been losing for a very long time. My first thought was that someone had died. Maybe one of the twins was sick, or maybe they had finally realized the absolute horror of what they had done and had come to grovel for forgiveness. Against my better judgment, curiosity, and a tiny, foolish sliver of human empathy won out. I walked to the front door, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled it open. They stood there on my porch, shifting uncomfortably. The contrast between us was stark. I was standing in the foyer of a home I owned outright, wearing a tailored shirt, projecting the quiet confidence of someone who had conquered their demons. They looked like beggars standing outside the gates of a fortress. "Victor," Brenda said. Her voice was raspy, lacking the sharp, authoritative edge it used to have. I did not smile. I did not offer a warm greeting. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat, entirely neutral. Gregory cleared his throat, trying to muster some of his old patriarchal authority, but it completely failed. "We need to talk to you. Can we come in?" I should have shut the door. I know that now. But I stepped aside and motioned them into the living room. I wanted to see exactly what kind of audit they were trying to run on my life after 18 years of total silence. They sat down on my sofa, looking around at the expensive furniture, the modern art, the sheer scale of the success they had zero part in building. I did not offer them a drink. I stood by the fireplace, crossing my arms, waiting for the pitch. I expected them to start with congratulations. I expected them to mention my promotion or at least pretend to be proud. I was wrong. Narcissists do not change. They merely adapt their manipulation tactics to the current environment. Brenda started talking, and within 30 seconds, the gaslighting began. She completely bypassed the fact that they had thrown me out. Instead, she painted a picture where I was the villain. She talked about how heartbroken they were that I had shut them out of my life, claiming that I should have been mature enough as a teenager to comprehend their rearranged priorities. She actually said, with a straight face, that I should have supported their decisions rather than holding on to petty resentment and moving in with my grandparents. I let her talk. I watched the absolute delusion spilling from her mouth. It was fascinating in a morbid way. She was trying to rewrite history, trying to make me feel guilty for surviving the execution she ordered. Then, Gregory took over, moving the conversation from emotional manipulation to the actual business proposal. He explained that the past several years had been financially devastating for them. The tech industry had shifted, their skills had become outdated, and the independent web engineering company they had tried to launch completely imploded. They were bankrupt. They had liquidated their assets, they were drowning in debt, and they were barely keeping their heads above water. And then came the punchline. The reason they were sitting on my couch. Lucas and Maya, the golden twins, the children who were supposed to inherit the kingdom, were now 17.5 years old. College applications were due. And Brenda and Gregory had absolutely $0 saved for their tuition. Your Uncle Richard told us you are doing incredibly well, Brenda said, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with a predatory desperation. He said you have over $100,000 just sitting in savings. We are family, Victor. The twins need to go to a good university. You have the means to make this right. You can pay for their schooling. It would be a great way to make amends for the past 18 years of silence. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the demand echoed in my living room. They were not asking for a small loan. They were demanding the financial security I had bled for, starved for, and sacrificed my entire youth to build. They were demanding I fund the lives of two teenagers I had not seen since they were in diapers, simply because we shared a fraction of DNA. They were trying to shift their massive liabilities onto my pristine balance sheet, framing it as a favor they were doing for me. The silence in the room stretched out for a long, agonizing moment. They looked at me expectantly, genuinely believing their manipulation had worked. They thought I was still that terrified 16-year-old boy desperate for their validation. They completely failed to realize that the boy they threw away died a long time ago, replaced by a man who calculated relationships purely on return on investment. And their ROI was deep in the negative. I looked at Brenda, my face completely devoid of any emotion. I did not yell. Raising my voice would imply that they still had the power to affect my emotional state. Let me make sure I understand this, I said, my voice quiet, cold, and razor-sharp. You threw me out of the house when I was a minor because you didn't want to spend another dime on me. You forced me to take on massive debt, work myself to the bone, and navigate my entire early adult life completely alone. You did not call when I graduated. You did not call when I got my first job. You ignored my existence for almost 2 decades. Brenda opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up a hand, silencing her. And now, I continued, because your own poor financial planning and business failures have left you bankrupt, you want to seize the capital I built from nothing. You want me to hand over $100,000 to fund the children you chose over me. Gregory puffed out his chest. We are your parents, Victor. You owe us for raising you for 16 years. I actually let out a short, hollow laugh. You were legally obligated to keep me alive. That is not a favor. That is the bare minimum requirement to avoid prison. I owe you nothing. I took a step closer to them, establishing absolute dominance in the room. When you kicked me out, you gave me a very specific reason. Do you remember what you said, Brenda? Because I remember every single syllable. She looked away, suddenly finding the floor very interesting. You said you wanted to save your money and resources for the children who deserved it more, I recited, letting the words hang in the air like a toxic cloud. So, here's my answer. I am applying your exact financial philosophy to my current assets. I am keeping my money, my resources, and my success for the person who deserves it. Me. You will not get a single cent from me. Now, get out of my house. The shock on their faces was absolute. Brenda's face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. She started screaming, calling me ungrateful, selfish, a monster. She realized, in that terrifying moment, that she had absolutely zero leverage. The account was closed. The assets were frozen. They were entirely on their own. I walked over to the front door, opened it wide, and pointed outside. Leave, I commanded, my voice dropping an octave. Or I will have the police remove you for trespassing. They stumbled out into the night, Gregory muttering curses and Brenda crying tears of pure, frustrated rage. I slammed the door shut, locked the deadbolt, and felt an overwhelming sense of power. I had finally audited the ghosts of my past, and I had liquidated them completely. In behavioral psychology, there is a concept called an extinction burst. When a subject is used to getting a certain reward for a behavior, and that reward is suddenly and permanently removed, the subject does not simply give up immediately. Instead, their behavior escalates dramatically. They try harder, louder, and more aggressively to force the old dynamic back into existence before they finally collapse. That is exactly what happened with Brenda. Having been utterly stripped of her control and denied the financial rescue package she felt entitled to, she went into a full-blown extinction burst. It started digitally. Uncle Richard, in his misguided attempt to reconnect us, had apparently given her my personal email address. 2 days after I kicked them out of my house, the barrage began. The first email was a massive, rambling essay. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. She meticulously listed every single basic necessity she had ever provided for me from the day I was born until the day she evicted me. She listed the cost of diapers, the cost of food, the hours she spent driving me to school. She framed basic parental duties as monumental, heroic sacrifices that placed me in an unpayable debt to her. She accused me of having a cold heart, of painting her as the villain while I sat in my luxury home hoarding wealth while my innocent siblings suffered. It was designed to hit every single guilt trip trigger a child could possibly have. I read the email objectively, as if I were reviewing a poorly written spam message. I did not feel guilt. I felt a clinical disgust. She did not stop there. When I did not reply within 24 hours, she sent another one. Then another. She was probably sending an email every other day, her tone shifting wildly between desperate begging, intense rage, and pathetic attempts to make me feel nostalgic for a childhood that was mostly miserable. I realized that ignoring her completely was only fueling her desperation. She needed a definitive wall to crash into. So, I made the decision to reply once and only once. I typed out a brief, surgically precise response. I stripped away all emotion and stuck purely to facts. I reminded her that raising a child until they are legally an adult is the bare minimum of the law, not a favor. I pointed out that she only kept me around when it was convenient and cheap, and the moment I became a financial liability compared to the twins, she disposed of me. I told her that her current bankruptcy was the result of her own bad decisions, not my lack of generosity. Finally, I stated clearly that she was a failure as a mother. I wanted absolutely zero contact with her moving forward, and any further communication would be considered harassment. I hit send and immediately blocked her email address. Predictably, she created a new email account a few hours later to continue the assault. I blocked that one too. I set up server-level filters to automatically trash any email containing her name or Gregory's name. I shut down the digital avenue completely, forcing her extinction burst to seek a new, more dangerous outlet. When you block a desperate, bankrupt narcissist from reaching you digitally, they will eventually try to breach your physical boundaries. I knew this was a possibility, but I underestimated just how far gone Brenda was. It happened the following Tuesday. Ironically, I had woken up feeling slightly under the weather, a mild fever and a killer headache. I made the executive decision to take a sick day, staying home in my sweatpants, drinking tea, and catching up on some reading. It was a stroke of absolute luck, because if I had been in the office that day, things would have gotten incredibly ugly in front of my subordinates. At around 11 in the morning, my phone rang. It was the main reception desk at my corporate office. "Victor," the receptionist said, her voice tight with discomfort. "I am so sorry to bother you at home, but there is a woman here in the lobby causing quite a scene. She claims to be your mother. We told her you were not in the building today, but she refuses to leave. She is demanding to see your office and your manager. What should we do?" A cold fury washed over me. Going after me in my personal life was one thing. Trying to drag my professional reputation into her chaotic meltdown was an unforgivable escalation. She was trying to publicly shame me into compliance. "Put her on the phone," I instructed. A moment later, Brenda's voice came through the speaker, breathless and erratic. "Victor, where are you? You cannot hide from me. I will stand in this lobby until you come down here and face me like a man." "I am at home, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "And you have made a catastrophic mistake. You are going to pay for your siblings' college, or I will tell everyone in this building what a selfish, horrible son you are," she threatened, her voice echoing slightly in the large corporate lobby. "Listen to me very carefully," I replied, stripping every ounce of humanity from my tone. "You are standing in the lobby of a multi-million-dollar corporation. If you do not turn around and walk out of those glass doors in the next 10 seconds, I will have the building security physically restrain you. I will have the local police arrest you for trespassing and disturbing the peace." She scoffed, but I could hear the slight hesitation. "You wouldn't." "I am not finished," I continued relentlessly. "If you ever show your face at my place of employment again, I will personally file a lawsuit against you for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I will hire the most vicious, expensive corporate lawyers in the city. I know for a fact you are bankrupt. You cannot afford a lawyer. I will drain whatever pathetic remnants of cash you have left. I will garnish any future wages you or Gregory ever make, and I will see you until you are too ashamed to even look at your precious twins. Do you understand me? I will obliterate your life." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. The reality of the power dynamic finally crushed her delusion. She was a broke, desperate woman trying to intimidate a wealthy executive with unlimited legal resources. "Give the phone back to the receptionist and leave," I ordered. I heard the phone shuffle and the receptionist came back on the line. She is walking out the door now, Victor." "Thank you," I said. "If she ever comes back, do not call me. Call the police immediately." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The siege had been repelled, but I knew the war was not over. A narcissist backed into a corner with nothing left to lose is a highly volatile variable. I spent the rest of my sick day on the phone with my personal attorney, preparing the groundwork for a formal restraining order. I was done playing defense. The ultimate collapse of Brenda's sanity happened exactly 3 days after the incident at my office. Her extinction burst reached its violent, inevitable peak. I was driving home from work. It was late, past 8 o'clock, and the sun had already set. I pulled my car into the driveway, hit the button for the garage door, and parked. I was exhausted, my mind preoccupied with a complex merger at work. I grabbed my briefcase, stepped out of the car, and locked the doors. I did not see her until it was too late. Brenda had been hiding in the deep shadows near the side of my house, waiting for me. As I turned to walk toward my front door, she launched herself out of the darkness. It was not a calculated approach, it was the wild, unhinged charge of a cornered animal. She slammed into me with surprising force, her hands shoving hard against my chest. The impact caught me completely off guard. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the edge of the pavement, and I fell hard onto the driveway. My briefcase popped open, scattering documents, and my phone flew out of my hand, skittering across the concrete. Before I could even process what was happening, she was standing over me, screaming at the top of her lungs. The words were a chaotic blur of profanity and blame. She blamed me for her bankruptcy. She blamed me for her miserable marriage. She blamed me for the fact that she was a failure. She was projecting every single ounce of her own self-hatred onto me. She lunged down, attempting to strike my face with a closed fist. The shock wore off, replaced instantly by survival instinct. I am a 33-year-old man who works out 5 days a week. She was an out-of-shape woman in her 50s. The physical mismatch was absolute. As her arm came down, I simply reached up, grabbed her wrist, and twisted hard. She shrieked in pain. I used my leverage to pull her off balance, sweeping her legs. She hit the concrete hard. I scrambled to my feet, still holding her wrist, and pinned her arm behind her back, placing my knee firmly between her shoulder blades to hold her down. I did not hit her. I merely immobilized her. "Get off me," she screamed, thrashing wildly against the concrete, sounding like a demon being exorcised. Fortunately, The screaming had shattered the quiet suburban evening. The front door of the house next to mine flew open. My neighbor, a retired firefighter named John, ran out onto his lawn. He saw me holding down a screaming woman in the dark. "Victor, what the hell is going on? Do you need me to call 911? John yelled. "Yes," I shouted back, keeping my weight fully on Brenda. "Call the police right now. Tell them I have an intruder restrained on my property." The next 15 minutes were a blur of flashing red and blue lights. 2 squad cars pulled up to my house. The police officers approached with flashlights and drawn tasers. I calmly explained the situation, slowly releasing my grip on Brenda and stepping back with my hands visible. Brenda, completely unhinged, immediately started lying to the police. She claimed I attacked her, that I dragged her into the driveway and beat her. But the physical evidence told a different story. I had no marks on me. My briefcase was spilled where she had shoved me, and John the neighbor gave a statement confirming he heard her screaming aggressively before he saw me restraining her. Furthermore, I pulled up the security footage from my porch camera on my cracked phone, showing her hiding in the bushes and ambushing me as I got out of the car. The officers did not hesitate. They read Brenda her rights, forcefully pulled her arms behind her back, and clicked the steel handcuffs around her wrists. Watching my mother being shoved into the back of a police cruiser was a surreal experience. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel triumph. I just felt an overwhelming sense of finality. The toxic asset had been permanently liquidated by the state. I pressed formal charges for assault and trespassing. The fallout over the next few weeks was absolute. The arrest was the final nail in the coffin for her marriage. Gregory, who was perfectly fine enabling her financial manipulation, drew the line at a criminal record. When he found out she had been arrested for assaulting me, the illusion of their perfect family shattered. He packed up his things, pulled the twins out of the house, and moved back in with his elderly parents in a different state. He abandoned her, just like she had abandoned me. Her marriage was completely destroyed. My lawyer moved swiftly. With a pending criminal charge and documented harassment at my workplace, securing a permanent restraining order was incredibly easy. She is now legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my home, my office, or me. I had a long, sobering phone call with Uncle Richard. He was devastated. He apologized profusely, crying on the phone, realizing that his careless bragging had unleashed this nightmare. He admitted he had no business sharing my life with her. I forgave him, because his heart was in the right place and he was the only reason I made it through college, but I made it clear that my privacy was now an impenetrable fortress. I also spoke with my grandparents, Helen and George. They were horrified by Brenda's violent escalation. They told me they had formally cut ties with her, refusing to let that kind of instability into their final years. She was completely, utterly isolated. She had caused her own ultimate bankruptcy. As for me, I am doing better than ever. The dark cloud that had been hovering on the horizon for 18 years finally broke, and the sky is clear. With the restraining order in place and my career thriving, I have actually started working with a realtor to look for a bigger house. A place with more land, more privacy, and absolutely no ghosts. After everything that happened, a distant part of my extended family heard the rumors and actually reached out. They told me that I was too harsh. They said that since I have so much money, I should have just paid the $100,000 to keep the peace, or at least mediated with her instead of pressing charges, letting her get arrested, and destroying her marriage. So, I have to ask you guys, am I the jerk for protecting my hard-earned life and refusing to fund the very people who threw me away? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.